I'm joined today by Anna Firth, who's representing the Conservative Party in Canterbury. And over the next 40 minutes or so, I'm going to ask Anna your questions. Divided into two parts. The first half is questions that all the candidates, including Anna, have already seen in advance. And so you'll get a chance to compare their answers between each video stream. And then the second half will be questions that you've asked live on the comments below as you're watching. So if anything comes up, if you have a burning question for Anna Firth, then ask in the comments below. But as I mentioned, we're going to kick off with questions that have been posted in the Residents Group over the past 2 weeks, and hopefully cover most of the topics that the residents are really wanting to get stuck into. So we're going to start with a question from Jim. Jim Titheridge posted, our local council budget has been cut to the bone. Will we see a reversal of this policy in the next government if your party gets into power?
Well, thanks very much, Jim, for the question, and thanks, Ed, very much for having me on. So Jim, the honest answer to that is that I'd love there to be an immediate reversal, and I hope we will work towards a reversal, but I can't guarantee that at the moment. Jim's absolutely right that local government has had to take cuts in the last few years of over 20%, but I have to say I've been really impressed with local government and the way they've responded to that, and actually frontline services have been kept to an extremely high level. But what I'd like to confront head on, Ed, is not just the effects of cuts, but the causes of those cuts, because it is a reality that the Conservatives came into government and inherited a financial mess. You know, we inherited a deficit of 9%. We've now got it down to 1.5%. And what I would say to the residents of Canterbury is that has been a painful journey, but we've come through it. We've got the economy now in a much better shape where we can start to reinvest. And it would be a tragedy to go backwards, which is what I believe a Labour government would do, to high tax and high spend. And the residents of Canterbury are in a really powerful position here because they hold the keys. Whether they give those keys to Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell to run our country, or whether they keep a Conservative government that has put the economy back on a straight and narrow, and hopefully, coming back to Jim's point, over time we can reinvest back into local authorities as well.
So, because obviously it's a unique-ish situation in Canterbury. We have a Labour MP currently and a Conservative-run council.
Yeah.
And over the last couple of years, the Conservative-run council have laid the blame at a lot of the spending cuts at the feet of the current government. So just to confirm, you're saying that the council's budgets will see an increase under a Conservative government going forwards, and it will be a significant increase.
No, I'm not in a position to guarantee that, Ed. I mean, what I'm saying is that we do now finally have the national economy back into balance. Finally, at the beginning of this year, we had some fiscal headroom again. So we're getting that deficit right down. It was 29 billion at the beginning of this year. I think it's gone up a bit now to 35 billion thereabouts. Puts us in a position where we can borrow, and that borrowing is affordable. So over time, if we continue with this progress, what I'm saying is that I would like us to be able to prioritise some of that money into local government. And if I was the MP, that's what I would be saying to central government, because I think local government do a fabulous job, and they deserve to be rewarded, and they deserve the resources to do that job well.
Sure. Okay, thank you. We're moving on now to a question from Amanda. Amanda Bates asks, do you support the Save Windsheep Water Meadows campaign? And other than that, can you expand on environmental policies generally? So obviously the Canterbury Residents Group, really engaged bunch of people, especially at looking at and analysing developments in the city, and the Windsheep Water Meadow as something which has sprung up into the forefront over the past 6 or so months. and there's this very energetic campaign to save it. What's your view on that?
Yeah, well, I can say to Amanda that I absolutely do support her and her campaign. I've been down to the Windsheep Water Meadows, and I've met the Canterbury Society there and the Windsheep Society and a representative of Love Hanbrook Marshes. Talked to them about the whole issue that we've got there. They've made a very compelling case that actually the council does need to look at this again, and just along on that industrial park, on the park and ride, from the actual water meadow, is some hard standing where the Serco commercial lorries are parked. And to my mind, we've got to look at whether, rather than take away virgin green water meadow, which incidentally had water on it, water meadow, not surprisingly, it's prone to flooding, and it did flood last week. It would be so much more sensible to take a part of that park and ride site that's already concreted over. I've been a campaigner as a councillor fighting off developers to keep green spaces. I think green spaces are incredibly important for our health, our well-being, our mental health. And so what I've done is I've actually written to the leader of the council, Rob Thomas. In fact, I bought you a copy of my letter if you want to pop it on your website, saying to him that I think a compelling case has been made here, and I would like to have a meeting as the MP for Canterbury with him, with the county councillor, with the chief executive, and let's look at the other proposals that the campaign groups have brought forward.
Well, so I mean, we're obviously, Rob will have a chance to respond to your letter, but that does put you at loggerhead with the current Conservatives' position on the water meadows. Do you feel confident that you're going to be able to get them to relook at the plan? Do you feel confident about that?
Well, the first thing to say is that the MP represents the local residents. They don't represent the council, and I think it's vitally important that the MP sticks up for residents. It's residents that vote them in, and so I would always be there for residents. And if that means taking on the council, if you like, then that's my role. And whether it's a Conservative council, a Labour council, or a Liberal council, that doesn't matter. My job would be to represent the residents to the best of my ability, and I feel very comfortable doing that. And maybe that's because I've had a background in doing that. And yes, well, I think the case that's been made is really compelling. That there are other options for the actual hard standing, for the additional park and ride spaces. But the campaign groups have also told me that there are other routes for that slip road. I mean, the campaign group's actually been quite reasonable here because no one objects to the slip road. That's sensible. And the allotments, those are also going to be developed. So it seems to me that this is something that's got to be looked at again before we take away precious green space.
Sure. Okay. Thank you very much.
We haven't dealt with the environment, Ed.
Well, yeah. I mean, yeah, sure. Your environmental policies as a whole, then. So I mean, the Conservative Party historically, not in the last couple of decades, have sure been making advances in green policies, but they're not the greenest of parties compared to Labour and Liberal Democrat, are they?
Well, it's really interesting you should say that, because I would say that it was actually a Conservative Prime Minister, namely Margaret Thatcher in 1988, who made that landmark speech in Brussels and first highlighted the climate change that was happening and the need for the governments across Europe to actually start to address it. So I'd say we actually have been on this page for a while, and that actually our commitment as a country to be carbon neutral by 2050, and of course here in Canterbury for the council to be carbon neutral by 2030, I'd say those are landmark. That's a landmark commitment. Now the Labour Party would say, well, we committed in our
similar commitment
to 2030, but they've already rode back from that, and now they're not sure where they are, whereas we haven't. And the architect of the Paris Agreement, Laurence Tibiana, when we made that commitment, she said this is a historic commitment by a UK government that will reverberate around the world, and now the eyes of the EU are on now our eyes are on the other countries in the EU to see if they can match it. So I actually think that our progress is actually pretty good.
Good, thank you. Right, moving on to another question then. A question from Adam Friend, and it's one of, I'm sure, many Brexit issues which have come up. So he asked directly, Canterbury is a Remain constituency, and how do your political beliefs align with this? And if you had to vote on the issue, will you vote with the majority of your constituents, even if you disagreed? You're a Brexiter, aren't you?
I mean, that's a really, really good question. And what I would say is that actually I think that the constituency of Canterbury and Whitstable and all the villages probably reflects the country as a whole, and that the break was pretty close to 50-50, not 50-50, but pretty close to it. But what's really, really marked when you're on the doorsteps is the number of people now who, whether they voted Leave or Remain, they just want the country to move forward. You know, even if they voted Remain, they say, I've had enough now of talking about Brexit.
But do they want to remain and move forward, or leave and move forward?
That's the fascinating thing. You know, people are saying, look, if it's a reasonable deal, and it's a deal that's going to get us a relationship with the EU, where we are trading with the EU, then let's get it done, because people can see that Parliament is gridlocked at the moment, and we've got to move beyond Brexit. And this is one of, you know, my big things, because I want to focus all of our attention now on public services, in particular getting a new hospital for the Kent and Canterbury.
So you're fully behind Boris's plans for Brexit. Let's get it done, even if it means 50% of your constituents will feel like they're not being represented by you.
Well, I'm very confident, but I'm not at all complacent that we will get a Conservative majority government. And if that government has been elected on a very clear manifesto commitment to get that deal passed, you know, to get the legislation done by Christmas and the actual for us to actually be out by the end of January, then obviously it wouldn't be undemocratic in any way for me to be voting with that decision.
You just mentioned there the Kent and Canterbury Hospital. The next question is, Helena Godman asks, what are you going to do to reopen the Kent and Canterbury Accident and Emergency and expand on broader healthcare issues facing Kent?
Well, this is, I've made this my number one campaign to fight to get a new hospital for Canterbury, and everyone has said on the doorstep that they're fed up with having to go miles to Margate, miles down to Ashford. Sometimes they're discharged in the middle of the night, and it's very, very difficult to get back. Whereas, of course, we used to have an absolute leading hospital here in Canterbury with 560 beds, you know, in its heyday, a leading teaching hospital, and I'd like to see it go back to that. And
so you met with Boris Johnson. There was a video that went viral on the Residents Group of Boris Johnson addressing the Crown, saying that Canterbury was going to be getting a new hospital. Ever since, there's been a lot of uncertainty over that. Can you say now what Boris Johnson's plans are for Canterbury?
Yeah, can I just go back, Ed? Because I started campaigning for this long before then, in fact. Obviously, I've intensified that since being selected. And, you know, my very first thing was to make contact with the hospital. I've gone to every public meeting that I can. I stood up at the annual general meeting and talked about it. And the fact that we've got to get 350 million committed from the Chancellor to East Kent. That's what's needed to make sure we are going to get the investment we need across East Kent. It's not just Canterbury, although I'm obviously focused on Canterbury. And then I went to the Health Secretary, because I was furious when I arrived up at the Conservative Party conference, and that list was published and the Kent and Canterbury wasn't on it. And I said to the Health Secretary, how on earth can this be? Because the estate here, the hospitals here, are in the bottom 25, the state of them, in the country. And there's a survey that's been done. They're likely to fall into the bottom 10. And the Kent and Canterbury is one of the worst. So how can this be right? And
so it's not right, but
So I've got the commitment. So I pursued it, and I got the health secretary to come here, and he has actually said outside that hospital on camera to KM that if we get a Conservative majority government, which, let's face it, would have to mean me being returned here in Canterbury, this is one of the few seats that's going to decide that important question, we will get that investment in the Kent and Canterbury, and I will be banging on his door every single day to make sure we get a new hospital, because you deserve it.
So, as well as hospitals, healthcare and caring is a big issue in people's minds. In fact, in the residents group, social issues seem to very much be at the top of people's agenda. A question here from Carey. Carey Miles asks, carers who look after their loved ones with severe disabilities and illnesses are paid £66 a week to do so. Would you agree that £66 a week is simply impossible to live on and unacceptable in the modern age? And what changes would come if your party formed a government?
Yeah, well, I would absolutely agree with Carey. And I've also made a big thing of the fact that I think caring really matters. And all of us, 1 in 10 of us now, are going to be a carer at some point in our lives. I mean, my dad's got dementia, my father-in-law's got terminal heart disease. So my mother-in-law is both mother-in-laws are caring every single day, and I agree with that. It's not enough, and we want to work to improve that. Hopefully, people who are caring are entitled to other benefits as well. And often people are not claiming all the benefits, and I would see it as my absolute priority to make sure people are getting all the support they need. But I am pleased that in the Conservative manifesto we have committed to an extra £1 billion every single year of this Parliament towards social care, which I hope would possibly relieve the burden on some of our carers. We've also committed to extending leave, if you like, for carers to a whole week. Now, I'd like carers to have more respite care than that, but it's a start, and I would be totally behind extending support.
The money, the funding there to do this, that's going to be something that's available.
Yeah. So the £1 billion is fully costed into our manifesto, and so is the additional respite care, if you like. What I'm saying is, as our economy continues to go from strength to strength, then for me as the MP for Canterbury, lobbying to increase those allowances for unpaid carers and carers would be an absolute priority.
So moving away from social, onto a bit more of an economical question. A question from Neil Fisher, who says, nothing has been done to prevent a repeat of the banking crisis in 9 years. How will your party address the loopholes previously exploited?
Okay, well, that's another excellent question. I think that the Bank of England might dispute that. Because
the 9 years, nothing being done.
Absolutely, because one of the things that we found with that banking crisis was that the regulation of the banks actually wasn't what it should have been, the FSA. And of course, Gordon Brown under Labour actually spun that out away from the Bank of England, and the Bank of England have now brought all that regulation back in-house. So they would say that they absolutely have done something there. The other thing,
though?
Well, no, that's not enough. But the next thing that they've done is bringing clawback arrangements. So if you have these rogue institutions run by, risk takers, massive, really wealthy risk takers, and they lose a lot of money, which will affect shareholders and our pensions, and has happened, you can now claw back from their bonuses. So you can actually start, making the people who are making these wrong decisions start to actually pay in their pockets. I think that's another really good thing. And then the final thing, I suppose, that's been done is the separation of the investment banking operations from the retail operations. So if there's a problem, as there was in that financial crisis with the investment banking arm, then you and I, who are just normal people putting our money into a bank or building society, our bit of the business, if you like, is kept separate. So actually, I would say to Neil that I think that there has been some action in this area, quite a lot of action in this area.
More to go.
Well, I mean, we always want to protect people. I think. I mean, this is one of the imperfections of a capitalist system. I mean, I think it is the only way to create wealth, but you have to have checks and balances to make sure that individuals don't get caught up in excessive risk taking.
I guess the question then that people ask is: are the Conservative Party the party best placed to enforce these checks and balances, or introduce these checks and balances?
Well, I guess I would say, given that the regulator went wrong as a result of the actions of the last Labour government and Gordon Brown, then I would say that they are certainly not the right party, and that actually we have taken, as a Conservative government, real steps to correct the problem.
So, coming away from big economy, but clearly very much related to it, I have a question now from Lynn Morris, who asked, in fact, she said, "It breaks my heart to see so many people sleeping on streets in Canterbury and now Whitstable, especially as the temperatures plummet. What will your party do to help?"
Well, I would say to Lynn that I absolutely agree with her. And as the MP for Canterbury, eliminating rough sleeping from the city centre would be an absolute priority. And I'm really, really pleased that the Conservative manifesto does actually commit to eradicating rough sleeping by the end of this Parliament. And they want to do that by, firstly, obviously, there's going to have to be some financial resource going in there, but also by new projects. Well, they're not actually new to Canterbury, because Canterbury has actually been a leading light in this area. But initiatives such as Housing First, which the Canterbury City Council has been championing, and also working with the wonderful charities that you've got in Canterbury.
Which in an ideal world wouldn't need to exist, but or do you think there's always a place for those sorts of charities?
One of the issues here is that Canterbury is one of about 7 cities in the UK which attracts more. You could say that it's fair share of rough sleepers. So there's probably always going to be a need to have some resource there. And Porchlight and Catching Lives do such a brilliant job that I would want to champion them and make sure they get more funding, not less. But the wider point is that if Canterbury is one of 7 cities that's having to deal more with this problem, then it should get more funding centrally. So I would be banging the drum to get more funding for Canterbury City Council, for projects like Housing First, and then for that to be distributed to these brilliant charities. And I've been to both Catching Lives and Porchlight, and they just do a fantastic job.
I completely agree. Completely outstanding charities, setting such a high standard for that sort of work. So that brings us to the end of the pre-submitted questions. So we're going to move on now to questions that are coming in on the feed. So I'm just going to remind people watching that if you have a question for Anna, then do post it in the comments. We won't have time to ask every question, and we're not able to ask every question, but do send it in, and we'll see if we can get to it. So the first question that's come in is from Adam, and Adam starts by saying, "I'm 18 years old. Canterbury Residents Group, we have a very wide demographic, but a large number of people on our group are young people. Adam says, I'm 18 years old. What will a Conservative government do after Brexit to make sure I can afford to buy my own home? So he's suggesting, I think, that there'll be an economic downturn after Brexit, and he'll struggle to buy his own home. What do you say to that?
Okay, so the first thing I'd say to Adam is that actually I don't think there is going to be an economic downturn, because the thing that is most toxic for any market is uncertainty. And we've now had business uncertainty for 3 years. So I actually think that there's pent-up investment, that once we actually get this this thing done, once we actually get past 31st of January, I actually think we're going to get investment coming into this country, which is going to boost jobs and boost opportunities for people like Adam. But what I specifically say to Adam is I am really pleased that in the Conservative manifesto there is a pledge on housing and on helping people get onto the housing ladder, which I've actually been campaigning for quite a while. Because one of the things that Adam will find, the same as most young people, is that the hardest thing to get together is the deposit. And that people are having to get these huge, 15, 20, 25% deposits.
Eye-watering amounts that most young people can't even imagine to begin to get together.
Exactly. And what we've put into our manifesto and what we're going to roll out is a new fixed interest mortgage, which is going to have either government or financial institution backing.
No deposit?
Well, sadly, not no deposit, Ed, but a 5% deposit, which is so much more affordable. So people like Adam will be able to get a mortgage and get on the housing ladder, and that's because of a Conservative government.
Okay, thank you very much. Question from Alistair. So Alistair asks, what will you do? I'm assuming your party as well. What will your party do to redress the widening gap between rich and poor in this country? And would taxing the ultra wealthy be an option? So it's become a big thing, this campaign, taxing the ultra rich, taxing people under 80k, over 80k. Is taxing the ultra rich the way to go to close this widening gap between rich and poor?
Yeah, well, just on that rich and poor gap, someone is bound to check, but I think I'm right in saying that actually the gap between the richest and the poorest widened by the most under the last 13 years of Labour government. But someone's bound to look into that.
I think you're right, but it's continued to widen over the past decade.
Yeah, and obviously, I think that the best way to reduce that gap is to continue to have a sound and functioning economy. And I think that the worst thing that we could possibly do is to return a Labour government with Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell in number 10 and number 11, because I think that's going to trash the economy.
But a sound economy, with the economy set up the way it currently is, will that not just completely widen the gap even more? Because a sound economy will just generate more money for the ultra wealthy to save.
No, because the Conservatives in office have actually generated a record number of jobs. We now have record employment. We have wage growth at its highest level for 11 years. And as I say, we got the deficit down from 9% to 1.5%. That generates jobs and it generates opportunities. But obviously there's always more to do. But on to the specific point that Alistair's making there about taxing the mega wealthy. I'd love to say, actually, yes, that is the answer. Because I think we all want. I don't resent paying tax to go to decent public services at all. I use public services. My children use public services. But ultimately, you've got to set tax levels at levels that people will pay, because we don't have a global enforcement system. And the reality is, the top 5% of taxpayers currently pay 50% of the tax take. The top 0.01%, which is 31,000. Pay 12% of the tax take, and it's just not realistic to try and get more and more tax out of a smaller and smaller group of people, because the assets and the businesses just go overseas. So we've got to set tax rates at a level where we're going to get more tax take in. And if you want a case study on this, of course, it was in the 80s when Lawson reduced tax rates from sort of like 83% down to about 60% and got more tax in.
Okay.
So
another question. Now, clearly, you're representing a party in Canterbury. Our MP for the last government hasn't been Conservative, so this question is specifically about the Conservatives' record so far. And Lucy asks, should the Conservatives be ashamed by the increase of food banks, which has gone up significantly over the past 10 years?
Well, I don't think that they should be ashamed that we've got more food banks, but obviously food banks is something that really concerns me, and poverty, is something that really, really concerns me. And as the MP for Canterbury, that is absolutely something that would be my priority. But I come back to the issue that the best way out of poverty ultimately is a good job.
Okay.
And although...
so you see a boost in the economy that you say the Conservative government will provide as being the route to solving the issue of food banks?
What we're trying to do is provide more jobs, and it's a Conservative government that has brought in a living wage, and we've now raised that again to £10.50 by the end of this Parliament. And it's by continually trying to up the wages that people are getting, and at the same time we've got a triple lock on taxation so that we limit the taxes that people are paying, and we've raised that threshold at which you start to pay tax to now £10,500, putting more money into people's pockets. And if we get a Conservative majority government, there'll be a post-Brexit budget next February. We're going to alter national insurance thresholds, which will put another £200 into everybody's pocket. It's only by that double. You've got to have a strong economy to generate the jobs, and then you've got to have a sensible taxation policy that doesn't tax those on low incomes, and generate the tax take from the higher earners at levels that they will pay. Okay. And then we can start to tackle these issues. And I as much as anybody don't want people having to rely on food banks.
Well, so another issue on a similar notion is Maisie asks, what will the Conservatives do to improve access to mental health services in Canterbury? And I guess this spans the sort of the health department as well as the education system and the policing system. So it's quite a broad question, but what's your understanding of plans with mental health?
I'm so pleased that Maisie has asked this question, because mental health is one of my absolute passions. I've been a trustee of Mind for quite a few years, and I've seen that we absolutely have to have a system of mental A&E in this country. I'm so pleased that the Conservative manifesto has committed to putting mental health on exactly the same level as physical health.
So that's an approach to mental health that is the same approach we have to physical injuries.
Exactly.
You can dial 999 and you can have an ambulance come and treat you, but it's that same kind of, you say that it needs to be people need instant access to mental health.
Exactly, Ed. So what I've been involved with with Mind is something called the crisis cafe model. So if you've got a broken arm, you obviously go to A&E. We all understand that. But if you're in crisis mentally and you turn up at A&E, it can actually be the worst possible place that you can go. You're hanging around waiting for 4 hours. You probably won't see the right people. You might then be discharged in the middle of nowhere, and that could actually make you a whole lot worse. Whereas so the crisis cafe model is a way of having the right clinicians with the right skills in a totally unjudgmental space, which is designed so that people can come into the space and just, come and have a cup of tea or coffee. But if they're in crisis, there are people around who can help them with side rooms that they can take them to and give them the right treatment.
It sounds brilliant. It's going to be expensive, though, isn't it?
No, this is the amazing thing. Where this has been rolled out, it actually doesn't cost a huge amount of money, because often the facilities are already there. So the Umbrella Cafe, it would be one such excellent location for this. The cost is really the staff, having the staff with the right skills. The Police and Crime Commissioner has helped us set these up, and with a grant from him, with a grant from the County Council. Possibly we might need to get some money off the NHS, but the great thing about it is not only do these crisis cafes actually save lives, they save money as well. So in fact, there's a clear case to be made for them. And if I'm MP for Canterbury, that is going to be one of my big priorities.
And is mental health something you met Matt Hancock the other day? Was it something you discussed?
Yes, it's one of his priorities as well. So absolutely.
So there's a commitment from across the board in the Conservative Party to mental health.
Yes, there is, and it's down there in black and white in the Conservative manifesto that we will put mental health on the same level as physical health.
Great, thank you for answering that one. So the next question is from Rachel. So quite a broad question, but a really interesting one. What will your first priority be if you became the MP for Canterbury?
Well, my very
Day one.
Okay, so my very first priority is going to be to ring up Susan Aycott, the Chief Executive of the Kent and Canterbury, and seek a meeting with her, because I met with the head of the Nurses Association the other day, Professor John Gilmore, and I was informed that on occasions in the Kent and Canterbury you can have 27 patients being cared for by one nurse. And that is completely unacceptable. And with winter coming, or really upon us, I want to make absolutely certain that that does not happen. So,
but is that something that it's even feasible to change overnight? I mean, that's obviously been the case. That's not a surprise to people like John. That's been something which has been the case for a while now. The Conservative government haven't been able to deal with that in previous governments. Is that something that can be turned around overnight?
But Ed, you've asked me what's the number one thing I'm going to do, and that is the number one thing that I'm going to do if I'm lucky enough to be elected on Friday morning, because I want to make sure that firstly people in the Kent and Canterbury are safe over Christmas, and that the nurses, who I think do an absolutely brilliant job in there, get the resource that they and the help that they need. And then my next call will be back to Matt Hancock to say to him, right, you made that commitment outside the hospital. I've got it on my mobile phone, and now I want to talk to you about making it a reality.
There's been a lot of discussion around two of the candidates, yourself being one of them, about them not being from Canterbury, about them not living in Canterbury. Neil asks, what came first, your ambition to be elected as an MP or your desire to stand in Canterbury?
Well, that's a fair question, and I have stood in other seats because I'm a lawyer and I believe in apprenticeship. And I actually believe that politics is something that you need to learn, and you need to practice. Perhaps is the wrong word, but you do need to learn the trade. And so I did stand in a losing seat in Erith and Thamesmead in 2015, and I think that was a really good experience. I think that's made me a better politician as a result of it. But I was absolutely delighted when Canterbury was advertised. I think it was around the beginning of the summer, because the opportunity to stand in your own county is really, really quite special. Not all candidates get that opportunity, and so I applied because I'm using the same roads, the same health service, same education system.
Were you pitted against many other local Conservatives?
I think I was. I mean, there was a long list of 8, I think it was, and we all came for interview in Canterbury.
Do you think then it wasn't necessarily a priority for the local Conservatives to choose somebody local?
No, I think it absolutely was, because we went down from 8 to 4, I think it was. A very stressful night in the Tokyo tea rooms where we had the final selection, and I was the only one from Kent. So I actually think it was important to have a local person. And since being selected, I've been here, almost every day. That was in August. We started campaigning. I started to find out what was important to people. Got on the phone straight away to the Police and Crime Commissioner about policing levels, because I wasn't at all happy with what I saw in the papers in August that had been going on in Canterbury city centre with the German tourist. I even went to see the Home Secretary about that, and then of course I found a cottage, which is now where I'm living in Ickham. So yes, I wasn't lucky enough to be born in Canterbury, but I hope I've demonstrated by my actions since that I'm absolutely thrilled to have this role, and I'll be 100% dedicated to. I think Canterbury and Whitstable is the best constituency in Kent.
Well, I completely agree. And if you weren't to be successful, would you be looking to stand as a candidate for MP in the next general election here, or I know this is a long way off, but or in another seat? Is it a life goal of yours to become an MP?
I've given this absolutely everything, and I'm not actually at the moment even going to consider the possibility of not being successful next Thursday. All I can say to you is be the privilege of my life to be elected, and I would give it everything to deliver on the things that I think Canterbury and Whitstable needs, and the things that people are talking to me about every day on the doorstep.
Canterbury is a very creative city, it's a very dynamic city, and a lot of people here are self-employed. And Andrea asks, she'd like to hear your thoughts about practical measures to help people who are self-employed and running small family businesses in Canterbury. So what seems to be often referred to as the backbone of the economy, these individuals running their own businesses, small family firms. What will a Conservative government, and especially you in Canterbury, do to help support those people?
Yeah, well, I think that small businesses are absolutely vital. I think they're the backbone of any local economy. They provide jobs. They're part of our quality of life in the shops and the services that they provide. So I would absolutely want to engage and listen to them and go to every meeting of the Chamber of Commerce and all such trade associations. A number of businesses have talked to me about the Business Improvement District, and there are issues around that I would like to help them with. Of course, business rates is always a big one, and I'm very in favour of having sort of a ladder for business rates so that new startups are helped. When I started off in the law, I was self-employed, and you have a ladder so that you pay a smaller amount of rent at the beginning, and then it goes up, and that's the way I would like to see small businesses treated. You
mentioned the Business Improvement District. That's very much a high street focused thing. Obviously, the high street is another area that people are paying a lot of attention to. So, what's your view on the Business Improvement District?
Well, I wouldn't want to talk to a lot of people about this, and I'd want to go along and meet the people who run the Business Improvement District, because some of the feedback which I have received from local businesses is that they're not 100% happy with it. So it's an area that I would want to explore, but I would be 100% on the side of small businesses and on shops on the high street. I think they do a fabulous job and they need our support.
And a question in from Alistair. Alistair asks, do you have concerns about Boris Johnson's use of language concerning minority groups? So this is something also quite close to my heart. I'm the chairman of Pride Canterbury, the LGBT annual event. And Boris Johnson doesn't have a great track record when it comes to language describing minority groups. Are you concerned about that and him being your leader?
Well, I'm actually concerned about the language that we use generally now in politics. I mean, I've been doing, obviously a number of hustings. This is the very last one, if you like, and I think that we all need to dial down the language a bit in politics, particularly online, on social media. It's so easy to tap off a comment that's quite rude or abusive and not really think about how that comment is going to land.
But obviously that's coming most of the time. It's coming from a place of passion and a place of engagement. Is there a risk if we try to tighten up on people using passionate language that we actually just alienate them?
I think people being more engaged is a fantastic thing, and I agree with you there that actually social media has. And I mean, look at this. This is incredible. 10 years ago, this probably wouldn't be happening. This type of interview, and this is, no. And so that's absolutely fantastic. But it's when it becomes abusive, and I don't think there's any role for abuse or racism or anything like that.
But just
in politics.
to go back to Alice's point, is it not then that with a prime minister that has openly used the same language that we struggle to moderate on the residents group, that's not good, is it?
I would like all prime ministers, to be careful with their language. And Boris Johnson has made comments in the past for which he's apologised for any hurt that he's caused. I think we are in a space at the moment where I think we are beginning to realise that there's quite a lot of language actually that we all need to moderate, and I think that's a good thing.
Okay, thank you. Just time for one last question. How have you found the election campaign so far? Have you been enjoying it?
I have. I've really, really enjoyed it. I have to say it's been quite exhausting.
Challenging?
Really challenging. The people of Canterbury and Whitstable have been amazing. We're knocking on doors all day long. Sometimes we're knocking on doors when it started to get a bit dark, but people are opening their doors. People are being welcoming. People are being friendly. I really would point that out actually, just how friendly everybody's been here.
Sounds like Canterbury.
I've really enjoyed it.
Anna Firth, thank you very much for taking part in this interview. That's it for this one. You can watch this interview again, and you can rewatch Claire Malcolmson from earlier. Coming up later today at 7:30 p.m, we'll be joined by Rosie Duffield for the final interview of this trio. And just before I go, I'd like to say once again a massive thank you to Advision TV for this incredible setup. Bow Concept, beautiful furniture shop in Canterbury, who have built this beautiful set for us, and Orbital Internet Group, who have provided us with the high-speed internet that we need today to stream this to you. Also, I'd like to say a quick thank you to Matthew, Alex, Joe, Sam and Diana, the team around me who have really helped to make this possible. Anna, thank you, and we'll see you later.